Boys, we're looking here at STEM 42, which is going to be looking at the planning considerations for improving performance, paying attention to planning to avoid overtraining, so the amount and intensity of training, the physiological considerations, and the psychological considerations. So that's what we're looking at here in STEM 42. When we're looking at athletes in relation to planning to avoid overtraining, some of the things we need to be careful here or we need to really consider is that after months of training with a session every few days, athletes are going to become fatigued, and it places a fair amount of stress on an athlete, both physically and psychologically. So in order for a coach to look after his athletes correctly, they need to make sure that the planning of the phases and the cycles of their training is done correctly to avoid some of these problems. Some of the main concerns in relation to planning of training sessions is undertraining or overtraining, use of exercise and work rates that are not sport specific, failure to plan long-term training programs, and failure to taper. We all know about tapering, reducing intensity, training before competition. So they're just training athletes too hard. And I always said a common thing, you don't keep flogging a dead horse. So you've got to know when your athletes are tired. When we look at the amount and intensity of training, the thing here is that very minimal athletes are undertrained, but majority of them, or a lot of them, are overtrained. And what we mean by that is that they think that if I train harder or if I train more, I'm going to do better. But the problem occurs is that once they start to do more training, overtraining then kicks in, and they have a number of concerns or injuries, or they're starting to break down. So overtraining occurs when workouts are too long and too frequent, they're too strenuous, so the intensity is too high, and they're conducted with inadequate recovery times between workouts. So they're not allowing the body time to recover. Overtraining occurs when an athlete does more work than physically their body is able to do and their body can tolerate. And as a result of this, the body's ability to recover and adapt is damaged. So a lack of time to recover. You need to give your athletes time to recover. I've always said it, at the gym you tear, at home you repair. You can't keep training the same muscles every day. They're going to get tired, they're going to get sore, and they're not allowed to recover. This ends up with more damage, and the athlete will be worse off. When we look at some of the physiological considerations, physically, when you look at an athlete that's overtrained, they look lethargic, so they look tired, they're not interested, and they also seem to have more injuries. And this needs to be taken into consideration when assessing whether an athlete is overtraining. Athletes are going to get tired during normal training sessions. That's common. So just because you see an athlete that looks fatigued doesn't mean they're overtrained. So what you need to remember, sorry boys, on this one here, what we look at here is that because they're as mentioned, because they may be fatigued and tired does not mean they're overtraining. Okay, so we need to think about things that they're doing. So for example, if athletes are looking like they're a little bit overtrained, and we need to bring in a little bit of variety, as it mentions here, a little bit of alternate practices. So some variety, get them off their feet. If they've been running long hard time over the summer, the grounds are hot, put them in the pool, do some swimming, still some conditioning, but it's going to be a different form of training for them. And the other important aspect is having a good diet, making sure they've got high in carbohydrates because they're working hard. They've got the source of fuel and the energy within their body to enable them to participate at that intensity. As a coach, if you look at an athlete who all of a sudden just has a rapid decline in performance, they just seem to really drop off, then that's when you need to consider, such as overtraining. It becomes a concern. This table here just looks at some of the physiological signs and symptoms of overtraining. So there's a heap of them there. Decline in performance, loss of muscle strength, loss of coordination, decrease in aerobic capacity, and even an injury. Injury is probably the most common one. And some of the biological functions here, you can go through, have a look at a lot of those there. But the key ones being the physical performance, what you can notice of an athlete, some of the signs and symptoms of an overtrained athlete physically. We're now going to move on to looking at psychologically. And the key part here, so we're not looking physically, we're talking about the mental aspect of the athlete. And again, if they start to lose motivation, so an athlete who looks disinterested, not too motivated towards training, this could be a concern about how much training they've been doing. Again, this can be corrected by looking at different types of training planning and looking at what the athletes may be doing, whether it be a bit of variety, reducing the sessions, all those sorts of things will help bring back the motivation. So these are the concerns for physiological. We've got here some of the signs and symptoms of an overtrained athlete, psychological. So again, staleness, they look just flat, not interested. They're not sleeping very well. They're just exhausted, decreasing self-esteem. They're negative about how they're dealing with others. They're removing from the team. They're not really fitting in. So these are, again, you start to notice these mental aspects here of an athlete. You'll start to think about them being overtrained. And again, rest is the important. Okay, more is not always better. That's what we need to keep saying. You don't keep flogging a dead horse. The body needs time to recover. So look at some of the ways to prevent overtraining. Again, from a coaching point of view, every aspect should be made by the coach and athlete to avoid overtraining. Because of the increased pressures to perform, many athletes and coaches push themselves too far. In my position as a strength coach with Parramatta, we have a bye. Players always say to me, they need to go away from footy and rest because they need to prevent themselves from overtraining. It's a long season and we train hard and their body gets belted around. A lot of the players will say to me, can I come and do some extra sessions? And I say to them, go home and rest because that's going to stop them from overtraining. They need to give their body time away from footy just to recover, and just to feel a little bit better, both physically and psychologically, mentally about how they're feeling in their head because it's a long season. So that's one of the main important roles. To help prevent overtraining, some of the following measures should be taken. We've spoke about nutrition, carbohydrates, main source of fuel. There's got to be a proper diet. Adequate rest and recovery between workouts. That is the key. The gym you tear, at home you repair. You don't get bigger doing bench press every day. You need to have 48 hours in between body parts to allow your muscles to recover. The training loads, how hard they're actually training. And some coaches might use the rate of perceived exertion. They give a score of 0 to 10, 10 being hardest session I've ever done, 1 being very easy session. An athlete who continually keeps coming up with high scores might need a bit of a reduce in their intensity. Varying exercise intensities, have some harder sessions. You might have some easy weeks of training compared to some harder weeks of training based on your scheduling. That comes back to the coach. Mental rehearsal and relaxation. We've spoke about these things previously in our classes. So looking to freshen up the mind. And keeping a training diary that monitors feelings. So the players might write some things down about how they're feeling and you get an idea if they start to talk negatively, there might be a little bit of overtraining. Just got 2 little case studies here. I'm going to go through and do the first one. So the first one, number 1A. So a sprinter considers she's not improving quickly enough. She increases her number of training sessions per week. After a few weeks, she becomes lethargic, finds it hard to motivate herself, has no improvement in times, and complains of a sore hip. So what could be some of the strategies that could be used in an effort to prevent overtraining in the following cases? So some of the problems we've got here, we know that she's lacked motivation. We know that she's doing more sessions, so maybe longer sessions of higher intensity, and she's training too often. Some of the strategies I would look to implement here is that, she needs more rest periods. So I'd be talking to this sprinter about the fact that, she's doing too much. So overtraining, more sessions per week, she needs to do less. So let's reduce the amount of her training load. I'd also look at some of her recovery to help with the sore hip. So the body's starting to shut down as a result of overtraining. So some of her sessions, there may need to be some recovery. I'd also alternate some of the activities she's doing. Can you break up, get her off her feet? Because she's a sprinter, she's going to do a lot of running, a lot of work on her legs. And that's why her hips are sore. Let's get her off her feet. Let's get her in the pool. Let's do some recovery. Let's do some alternate activities to get her motivation back. I'd look at some relaxation techniques. We'd look at, setting some goals. This way is going to help her improve her motivation. So there's some of the strategies. But the thing for me is too much training, so too many sessions, reduce the intensity, reduce the sessions. Now, instead of doing 5 sessions, let's do 3 sessions a week, but make those sessions really good. Must implement some recovery technique here to help her with her injuries. And because we've reduced the sessions per week, when she turns up to train, she's not going to be lethargic because she's going to be more excited about her training session. So there are a couple of strategies that you can implement for this little scenario there on the sprinter. And that's STEM 42, boys.